information on each other. Right, we do.
Welcome back, and we'll go ahead and continue with our committee day. I would like to recognize the Boating and Law Enforcement Chairman, Bill Cox.
Glenn Moats, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm presenting Proclamation 17-11, which is a temporary suspension of a no-wake zone on Nickajack Reservoir. This is in association with a TWRA marine event permit that's issued to the Outboard Drag Boat Association for annual boat races to be held in the vicinity of the Marion County Park boat ramp. The suspension of the no-wake zone is only for participants in the race for October 13th through the 15th of this year, and this would be from 10 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. those 3 days.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions on the boating and law enforcement? I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion from the audience or the public or the commission? On the boating and law enforcement, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've got something I'd like to bring up. I don't know who I need to address it to. Well, I think right now's the time for this. It's kind of an experience that I have on the lake that I live on, Douglas, but I'm sure it's going on in other places. And I'm just going to tell a real quick little story, and then I've got a suggestion for somebody. We've now got probably close to 100 rental float boats on my lake now. Used to, there might have been 5 or 6, but you can rent them 2 hours, you can rent them a half a day, you can rent them for a day. And there's so many families coming up there now, and the wildlife officers do such a great job trying to look out after them, but we have so many people that does not have a clue about boating safety, renting these boats. And who I'm putting a lot of the blame on is the rental companies. They're just seeing that dollar, send them out, be sure there's enough life jackets for everybody, and here they go. I've seen people with their sitting out on the front, on the bow of these float boats, dragging their feet in the water. We had a fatality last summer up there where one of the rental boat companies, they also will rent you a tube. They rented this family a tube. The guy on the tube didn't know he had to wear a life jacket. Well, he got thrown off and drowned. I was going to make a suggestion, a statewide suggestion, that TWRA come up for these boat rental companies to be somehow registered with TWRA and have like a 2-piece paper or a carbon copy with a safety checklist that rental company has to go over with their customer before they take that boat out, and showing that they did tell these people, you must wear a life jacket, you cannot be on the front of the boat. Just a simple, the 15 different simple rules to keep them safe that day. And then that person has to carry that with them on the boat that day, showing that they was told about these safety issues. This last weekend, I saw a 10-year-old kid out there on a tube with no life jacket again, and I thought, these these people, they're just saying, get that boat out of here, get it back in here so we can rent it again. But if we had something like that to where these boat owners had to go over some stuff, I just think it would maybe save some lives in the future.
I think it's a great point. Chief Ryder, would you like to give us a little background and talk about that, just 60 seconds?
Well, they've
Yeah, just, thank you, Commissioner. I'll bring in our Betsy Woods, our education coordinator for the state, that can provide some educational materials that you referred to. But there are provisions in the law that these rentals or liveries, whatever term you want to use, that they have to provide some information in order to rent that boat, and they're responsible for providing their safety gear and all that. But we have checklists at boat ramps and whatnot. Maybe we could create some kind of checklist for these renters to ensure that these renters get the proper education before they go out. So I'll take that back to our education coordinator. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
So Kent, are these boats at marinas? They're just stored at marinas, and that's who the marina owners or who's renting these?
Yeah, most of them are marinas. The main one that I'm after up there, it's not a marina, it's a bed and breakfast house. And they started renting boats 6-7 years ago, and they've grown their fleet to about, they probably got 30 float boats now. And our wildlife officers on our lake, I personally know, have went and told him, you got to do a better job at educating these people before you send them out in a boat. He just blows them off.
So are the boats just lined up along the shore? They have
Oh,
docks for all these boats?
he's got a big dock there. You know, he don't sell gas to the public or anything. It's just his own privately owned business where he rents boats out of. But there is several at the different marinas. Each one of the marinas that sell gas and full service, they'll have 10 or 12 of them also, and they're pretty good about it.
Commissioner Woodson, did you have a question? Okay. Anybody else? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll now recognize Chairman Holbert of the Budget Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to call on Director Ed Carter.
Thank you, Chairman Holbert. If you don't mind, just like I did last time, can I stray from the agenda just for a second?
Yes, sir.
One, I want to mention, our honor guard was designated as the folks to present the colors at the Titans-Bears game this last Sunday. It was quite an honor for our guys, and they've done so well across the state. I was really glad to see them get that. I was really sad to see that that Fox News was carrying that, the Fox Network, and they didn't include the pregame thing, so they didn't make the national TV, but they were there, and we have pictures, and I think most of y'all have been sent pictures from some of those. Just wanted to say what an honor that was for those guys. The other thing is, back to the hurricane things going on, just a quick reminder, we might want to mention this again tomorrow, but as the rains move forward, you know, dove season, rain and cool weather just wreaks havoc on dove fields. And according to all the weather forecasts, we're looking at both of those for this upcoming opener. So I don't know exactly what that will do for us in Middle and West Tennessee. I don't think it's quite going to make East Tennessee yet. Hope not. But in any case, some of our management areas, we were inundated with water earlier this year, and we had a terrible time getting crops in on some of them. Well, now we finally got crops in, and they got 4 to 5 inches of rain in parts of West Tennessee last night, and some of those areas that we had so much trouble getting crops in are now going to be flooded, and those crops may or may not make it for our waterfowl season. And some of the places like Bogota, I think it's Bogota, that has the youth dove hunt. It may or may not occur because of the water. If the water level rises like it usually does in that area, you probably won't be able to get to the field. Just wanted to mention that that even though we're a little ways away from all of that that's going on in the Gulf, it is impacting us already, and probably will impact us even more. So. And one last little comment, back to Commissioner Wood's comments on the boating part. When we were able to pass the boating education law back in whenever that was, there was specific exemptions made for rental companies that their people didn't have to take those classes or didn't have to have that education. And then on the second part of that, we can regulate what they have to have in the way of safety equipment, but we can't regulate their business. So we can't tell them what they have to do other than suggest, and that's what we've done in the past. But I just throw that out to say, as this committee's looking at all these other things that have to do with rentals and all those kind of things, this might be a good thing to throw into the mix. So. So thank y'all for allowing me to stray again. On the August the 14th, the Budget Committee of the Commission met to go over the preliminaries of the budget, knowing that probably some of those things would change because we still had not closed books, and in fact still have not for the entire state of Tennessee. Had a few things that would change. 10 commissioners out of the 13 of y'all were able to make that meeting, so some of the things that I would say today will kind of be redundant to some of the things we've already gone over. So I will, Mr. Chairman, it's whatever way you wish, I'll probably go into less detail today than in the past. So it's up to you. I'll go as much detail as you like.
Since we got some that weren't here, it'd probably be good to get them up to date as much as possible.
Okey-doke. I'll start out by saying that the budget books that you have issued, I'd like to start on the very beginning part there on page 1 and make a few comments about that and explain to you how we put this together and have some of the information that's involved in our budgeting process. To begin with, it's literally almost a year-round process. We'll begin in March putting things together. Then we'll go through our processes till we finally get to the point around the 1st of August where we can bring you all something and hope that we can pass our budget in the August meeting, because it's a requirement we have from Finance Administration downtown and others in order that they can include the budgets in the governor's budget as it goes before the legislature. So after we do all of our budgeting part, which again I'm summarizing, but we take each division and do a budget review, and that lasts anywhere from an hour to 6 hours, depending on how much budgeting that particular division has. For instance, I'll pick on our legal division. They really don't have a budget, so to speak. They have their office part, they have their salaries, and that's about it. So it's really easy to go through their budget. But when you get into fisheries, wildlife enforcement, and all those other entities that have larger budgets and really more detail, it takes a long time to go through them. We have about 450 separate budgets inside the agency, and we go through each one of those line by line, comparing what's been spent over the last 3 years, seeing whether or not things are in the right budget category, whether or not they've been short or whether they're over, and then looking at the reasons for each one of those. So it's quite an extensive process that we go through. Once we get to this point and bring it to the commission, if the commission sees fit to pass the budget, which we really hope that we have answered enough questions that you'll feel comfortable doing that, it goes from here to Finance Administration. We'll meet with the Finance Administration folks and go through our budget again, and then they will ask their comment, make their comments and all those things. Then from there, it will go into the governor's budget. That'll be taken to the legislature, and then we will appear before 3 different legislative committees to present our budget again. So I just tell you, it's a long process, and it usually ends up being passed in May, and by May, we've already started on the next year's budget. So like I said, it's a continual process, and it's long and involved. And I know that our budget is, for people who are in the private business, our budget is complicated, and it's different than what you would see in most business operations, and a lot of that's because we're driven by different state rules that we have to utilize when we put budgets together. One of the things that I'll mention to you is that when we bring a budget to you, and I'll explain a little bit more in detail, but the one that we're asking for to have changes made to is the one we're in right now, and then we'll ask you to look at the next year budget, that being 2018-2019, which will be beginning a year from July. So we're always way ahead in terms of what that means, and we're always trying to forecast what we think revenues will be and what we think expenditures would be. But as we go forward and look at each one of those years, there's always a little bit of difference in each one. So I'll begin with 2016-17, which is, of course, the one that ended June the 30th of this year. That budget is no longer anything that we're operating out of, with the exception of some things that are still being paid from those things that were accrued but not yet completed by the time the year closed. So the things you see in 2016-2017 are actual expenditures. That's not a budget figure. When that budget was put together in August of 17, just like we're doing with you here a year and a half ago, we asked for a budget of $87 million. A budget of $81.9 million. So we'd asked for that, and that's what you approved. But at the end of the year, as we always do, when we come in and we have federal monies that come in or grants from other folks, and we have to expand the budget in order to accept those and bring the forward program. Even though we asked for a budget of $81.9 million, the budget ended up being $116,176,000. So that was the actual expenditure for that year. Out of that $116 million, we spent, as you see there, $87,176,000. So those are actual expenditures from every one of the categories. Those 25 different lines that you see in each budget, every one of the 450 budgets we have in the agency have those same 25 lines, and everything has to be broken out. I wouldn't ask you to go there right now, but just for making a note, each one of those budgets starts on page 42. And you'll need glasses or a magnifying glass because it's pretty small to get it all on the same page. But each one of them are outlined as to what those categories are broken out into, whether it's supplies or equipment or contracts or whatever it happens to be. You can track those through each one so you know exactly whatever that budget number has to be and what the funding where the funding is coming from and how much we expect to spend. Of this 2016-17 year budget that you see, we're moving forward, carrying forward out of that budget things that we could not complete during that year. And of those things we're looking that we couldn't complete, a carry forward of about $13.072 in millions. So $13 million being brought forward from the budget we just finished, things that you have already approved, but we're bringing them forward because we couldn't finish them. And they will go into the center category, the 17-18 year, which is the budget that we're in now. 17-18, of course, it will end June the 30th of 2018, but the budget we're in now is the one we're working out of, and the reason that it's so much larger than either the one in 16-17 or 18-19 is because of those carry forward projects, and that always bumps it up. Plus, everything that's in this budget is brought to you as though it will be spent in its entirety, and acting like all of our positions are fully funded, and there's a person in those. So we have to do that in order to meet the state requirements. You can't bring forward anything in the way of a position or a contract or anything else unless the money is completely there, even though you may have a 5-year time span that you're going to spend it over. So it gets a little complicated, but that's why it's so big in that center part. We came in for y'all that were at the August meeting, the 14th, and we showed you where we thought we would be. We were talking about things will change between then and till the time we get to the August meeting bring it for you for approval, and it has by about $3 million. To tell you first why that's changed a little. We got, actually the day of the budget meeting, we're notified that health insurance and retirement costs were going up for state employees, and our part of that was $2.3 million, and plus another $1.53 million in health insurance and retirement. So those two together really knocked up the amount of money that we had presented to you earlier. There's also a couple other expansion projects that we didn't know about at that time that have increased it as well. So I'll try to go through those in whatever detail you want, but we just tell you that the center column, we're projecting a budget of $107 million by the end of this year, but we know that that will change because we'll bring forward to you again expansions as we go throughout the year and have to add that to it. So know that that's not where it's going to be, but give you a comparison. Last year when we brought the carry forwards to you, instead of being $13 million, it was $15.4. So it was $2 million less in carry forwards this year than last year. There's reasons for all of those, but things that are being carried forward are things like finishing the work on this building, some of the contracts that weren't done, construction projects that weren't able to be finished. And I've got a list of those for you that I'll just mention real quickly, some of the bigger items that you will see in this budget that made it larger. We have an ADA compliance, that'd be in the Americans with Disabilities Act, to bring some of our property up to standards of about $900,000. There's $600,000 to replace the roof on the main headquarters building. A lead filtration system in one of our shooting ranges down in Memphis at $391,000. $2.6 million at the Lone Oaks Range, which is Lone Oaks property that we're doing a firing range with the University of Tennessee. Another 2.3 for a Crossville firing range, 1.2 million for Greenville, and a firing range there. Some equipment replacement of about $480,000. vehicle replacement of 1.2 million. Our brand marketing program that we talked about, how we're going to market through emails and some other things we're doing through our new license sales system is going to be $170,000. Then we have a Buffalo Ridge Wildlife Management Area. That's a brand-new wildlife management area that's more of an education outreach area. It's actually a refuge, Buffalo Refuge, as opposed to a wildlife management area as such. That's $815,000 alone, but there's no license money involved in that. We were lucky enough to receive an appropriation of $215,000 from the legislature and matched that with federal funds to come up with the $815,000 budget, but it's a new area and lots of good things going on there, but no license dollars involved. At the meeting that we had in August, we looked at what we would have to do for White Oak Wildlife Management Area and to come forward. If you remember the presentation that was made to you about what we'd have to do to address the flooding on White Oak, we were in litigation with the farmers around that area. We lost that lawsuit, and they have nicely told us that they want to work with us in any way they can. And I would like to talk a lot about that, but at the same time, while we're talking about budget, I'll stay off of the reasoning for all the White Oak things, just to say that we were involved in that. We brought forward a plan along with the West Tennessee Basin Authority to how we would address that. It's about nearly a $3 million project over 2 to 3 years. To get started, they're going to put up in the neighborhood of about $400,000 to $500,000 that they have in grant money, and we would utilize wetlands funds to come up with the rest. So we'd be increasing our budget by $1.1 million, and we brought that forward at the last budget meeting and to address that. Our airplane that we have is a twin-engine airplane, obviously a small airplane, but still twin-engine. We are mandated to replace the engines on it this year. That's $80,000 worth of airplane engines that weren't in the budget as well. An additional $25,000 of maintenance that will come annually along from the Department of Transportation back on the airplane part. So those are, I could go on with other smaller projects. Those are the larger items that are coming forward that's making a difference in these budgets. They're both expansions and improvements. An expansion is something that we do the current year budget, asking you to fund programs that weren't in there when we brought that budget to you originally. So expansions for the 2017-2018 year are on page 3, and it will tell you a little bit more about those if you want to look into those. There's about $2.5 million in wildlife and $368,000 in boating. Of those expansions in wildlife, the 2.5 or $2.6 million, 20% of that is license dollars. The rest of that, the other 80% of what we're asking for in expansions or some other funding source other than license dollars. And again, one big chunk of that was $1.1 million for White Oak and $815,000 for Buffalo Ridge, and that's two of the major amounts that go into that $2.6 million. At the end of this year, if things go as we project, we expect to put back in about $7 million into our reserve. When we were putting this budget together and we came to y'all and said, here's the budget we're projecting for this current year that we're in, and we think that we'll take it out probably in the neighborhood of $3 million. Well, instead of taking out $3 million, we're actually going to put back in somewhere around $7 million. So I kind of looked at that as a $10 million segue to the good side, and that we're doing better than we'd projected, and there's reasons for that, obviously. But anyway, $7 million that we're putting back in the reserve, and that may be even better than that. In the past, we spend about $10.5 million a year that we pay to the state of Tennessee to be a part of state government. Part of that we get back, not much of it, but we get back some of it. But this year, they did not bill us for that. And then at some level, we don't know exactly what, and they have until December to make that final decision as to whether or not they will bill us for it, whatever those services happen to be. We've got that built into the budget, so if it doesn't happen, we will be better off than what I just told you. So we're giving you what we feel like is worst case scenario of where we will be if we have to pay those funds. So I can stop and take a breath there for a second, or I can move on into what we're projecting for the 18-19 year, but Mr. Chairman, whichever way you want to go.
Yes, right, so far. Commissioner Cox.
Yeah, it just occurred to me to ask and I didn't think of it in the budget meeting. The marketing through Brant and the new email, we had kind of talked that money would be net revenue neutral because of the TV show. I thought the TV show was on a 5-year contract, and these two are expansions. Isn't that money for the TV show already budgeted?
I'll give you a yes and a no on that. It was in the year that we just ended, and it was at 225 or 250. So that's how much money was in there. We had the choice of either taking what was left over, which at that point was $170,000, because we still had bills to pay the TV folks as we went through the end of this year. So $170,000 of unspent funds. We had the choice of either rolling that forward, carrying it forward like we did the other, or doing an expansion to this year's budget. And when we go down to the legislature and explain our budgets, it's easier to talk about current year and not go into expansions and improvements unless you have to. So we thought it'd be same money, but it's more judicious just to call it an expansion to this year as opposed to rolling it forward. The funding is the same either way. If we'd rolled it forward, it would have still been the same amount of money. The only thing that's different is the difference between that $170,000 and the $250,000 that we had budgeted. So we're back to the $250,000 mark if you include all of that together, which is, again, the same amount of money that's been in the TV show every year. It's just that we present it to you in a different way.
So this is not in addition to the 250?
It is not.
Okay.
That would have been a simpler way to say that, wouldn't it?
So what are we paying Brant now between, looking over there on that other side, I seen we're paying them $540 twice? Is that the way I seen that?
It's in there twice, but it's actually one payment. And we're not really sure when we put it in there twice. We looked at that.
You had different codes under it, your code numbers changed. I'm just wondering, we're paying them that, and then are we paying them this 69 and this 170 here, and what all else I know they get, is it 300 they get off boat registration I saw over there in there further or something?
It is. Our Brant contract, and I should have, before I even got into this, Michael May is our assistant director now over staff operations. This is Michael's first commission meeting as assistant director, so welcome, Michael. But Michael kind of spearheaded that whole thing. We were putting it together, but essentially we have a 10-year contract at just over $1 million a year to put that together. So that two 540s are actually what goes to Brant on the wildlife side. Then there's a 240, 170 from the boating side. So that's an annual cost. Now, the $170,000 is being matched, and if you want the real details, I can get Michael to do it, but between the hard card sales that they're doing, they earmark an amount of money out of that we can utilize for the marketing side. Then they also are putting in money of their own, and there's a percentage base of what they're putting in out of money that's not associated with that. And then that comes up to $170,000 a year. The other part, you're talking about the $69,000, there's two different charges in that. There's a $40,000 thing that goes to a new email system that meshes in with the Brant stuff. It's separate, but all together. Brant says that they cannot handle what we want to do in the email system, so that we should look at some of the states that are utilizing this other email system to do that. And what it does is goes through filters and those kind of things that the Brant folks can send out anything that we want to send out in terms of saying, hey, you need to renew your license, you need to buy a new license, but they can't send out things like, hey, it's opening a dove season, here's what's going on regulation-wise. So I don't know all the dynamics of why that works that way, but anyway, several states use this company that we're about to use, and that's $40,000 a year. But there's, for lack of a better word, like a system that goes along with that tracks newspapers, periodicals, and those kind of things that has anything to do with our agency. So after this initial year, that that $69,000 will go down to $40,000. Was that close, Michael? Good.
Go ahead.
Okay, moving on into 2018, 2019, it's very similar in terms of how things are put together. Going down the categories, there's nothing really unusual about what's in this particular budget, other than some of the things that will be in the way of improvements. And improvements are those things, an expansion is something we do the current year, an improvement is something that we do to the year that's projected. That being things that are above what we would have budgeted in those same categories this year. So going into the 18-19 year, in improvements, here we go. 1.114 million in improvements, and that's on page 7 if you want to look at what those are. Out of that 1 million,